Hey Kim, I'm doing my video assignment for my conclusive exit portfolio, and I was unsure initially what topics I wanted to cover, so I think I'm going to kind of jump around from a bit of those options that you gave us. First and foremost, I want to kind of just chronicle my journey throughout this course. When I first initially took this course, I was intrigued, but I also felt that I was already had some knowledge on some of these topics. I worked for Residence Life at Brock, and I've done a good amount of volunteer work. And for myself, I assumed that that meant I already had a good wealth of knowledge, and I had done a lot of research on mental health. I'd done a lot of research on ableism and LGBTQ rights and all that kind of stuff. But one of the big topics that I didn't know as much about was racism. I understood that it was a concept. I understood, obviously, how to try to not be racist. But I didn't understand kind of the deeper systemic side of things. So some of the nitty-gritty parts of the Black Lives Matter movement, police brutality, the way the education system is set up as a whole just to be a bit systemically racist, these were topics that I didn't understand nearly to the full breadth that we ended up covering in the course. So for me, that's where I gained the most knowledge from in this class, was kind of opening my eyes to racism and things like the Black Lives Matter movement, discussing indigenous kind of oppression and things like that. That really allowed me to grow as what I believe as a future educator. And I think one of the most profound things that helped me over the course of this course, sounds a little weird there, is just kind of how deeply ingrained racism is into our entire society. I know just recently Adam showed us the comparison between the two history textbooks, one from, I think he said it was the 70s or 60s, talking about how the natives needed the Europeans to come because they had no form of culture themselves and needed the Europeans to come and rescue them, and kind of that white hero, white savior complex. And then even now, today, though, when he was showing us the history textbooks, it might do a little bit more justice to them, kind of talking about the fact that they did have a very well set up society before we came here, but it's not nearly from their perspective. It still is a history textbook very much written from the European perspective, from the white settler, and we are still trying to paint ourselves as that kind of hero, as that good person. So as much as we have come a long way, we still definitely have a long way to go. Now, kind of tying this stuff into a little bit more of my own experience as a future educator, I still was blown away. I know I touched on it in my last video, but I was blown away with the fact that we were still doing To Kill a Mockingbird during my placement. I had mentioned it to you. I showed up at the school and found out that she was already about 10 chapters in. It's like a 28-chapter book, I think, so almost halfway into To Kill a Mockingbird, and that's what I was going to be taking over. So I had no comprehension of what the groundwork was done for this novel. I understand it's not the perfect novel to teach kind of racism or racial systemic racism and all that kind of stuff, but at least if the groundwork is laid down right, you can try to get as much out of it as possible. It might not be perfect, and there's absolutely novels that are better than it, but if that kind of groundwork approach is done correctly, at least the students are still able to kind of get something out of this book. But I had no idea what had been done for them. So trying to teach it, I just felt like I was tripping over her toes a lot. I would come up to a point like the lynch mob and try to kind of go over the whole lynch mob lesson and like how that is like a historical piece, and there were lynch mobs back in the day and things like that, and there still are some today. And found that we just seemed to clash on some of the ways that I would address things, and I found that seemed to be coming up throughout the whole time of my teaching on when I would try to address equity issues or diversity or social justice or any of those kind of more extracurricular learning aspects that I think are absolutely important to education, but not really in the core curriculum. Those were the spots that we would clash on. So I know I'd already mentioned to you when I tried teaching a lesson tying it into the whole case in Ireland on like the whole "my underwear does not mean my consent," and then I tried to talk about that photo, the V-Day photo where it's the sailor dipping the nurse and kissing her, and it's actually the most famous photo of sexual assault because the nurse actually had no idea who this sailor was. Whenever I would try to address those things, and I was trying to do it in a way that was appropriate for grade 10s, like I was careful with my word choice, and I was using very vague terminology and kind of letting them more set the tone for what they're going to learn in the classroom, is I would get told afterwards that material wasn't appropriate for students. And for myself, I was appalled by this because I remember in high school, for me, we didn't talk about consent at all. It was not really a topic. I mean, yeah, you kind of knew that, okay, like I shouldn't really touch someone unless they want to be, kind of thing, but they don't go over what exactly does consent entail, the enthusiastic, repeated yes and all that kind of stuff. And how, like, if you're intoxicated or anything like that, you can't properly give consent. These weren't topics that I was made aware of really until high school. Or not until high school, sorry, until post-secondary, until university. And that has me concerned because how are we supposed to blame these students? How are we supposed to hold them accountable if they do commit sexual assault or anything like that when we've never educated them on what it is? I mean, I get as a human being, you should not do certain things, but if we aren't teaching our students what sexual violence is it really their fault if they commit it? If you have a 16 or 15-year-old student who rob something, it is their fault because we've taught them not to rob things. Or like if they beat somebody up, we've taught them that violence is bad, violence is a crime, they know not to do it. But when it comes to sexual violence, when there's so many little facets to it, if we've never taught them about it, is it really their problem is it not their problem, but is it really their fault if they commit it? And I think as educators, it's our duty to teach them because we don't know if anyone's going to teach them at home. And it's our job to try to kind of open their eyes and kind of educate them, not just about our course material, but about the entire world around them. And that's what I was trying to do in my classroom. And I know you talk a lot about we got to wait until we're inside the system before we can try to change that. And that was what really opened my eyes to realizing that that's the case. Is a lot of these topics, you need that kind of security of you have a job, you're there, you're not going anywhere before you could try to enact any form of change. Because I was kind of terrified after I'd given that lesson and got the negative reaction from her as well as my cohort advisor that was potentially not a topic I should have been talking about with grade 10s, because I kind of finished it and thought I was like, oh, I'm going to get like this big pat on the back. They're going to be so impressed. And then to get a negative reaction kind of completely threw me off. So that's what I found beneficial about this course, though, is it has prepared me for some of those reactions that you might get when you're trying to teach material like this. And having this experience now, I'm more aware of what it might occur when I go into my own classroom, eventually once I'm a full-time teacher, kind of some of the reactions that I might get from parents or fellow teachers or administrative teams, that it's not always going to be positive. There are still going to be people that aren't happy with the way things are being taught, with the material that I'm trying to cover. And as long as I do it in kind of an academic way that I can support why I believe there's benefit in what I'm teaching, as long as I can do it in an appropriate way, that's kind of, I'm not throwing around inappropriate language or doing it in too mature of a manner, then I do think absolutely it's something that I hope to include in my curriculums, in my units moving forwards, because I think there's a lot of benefit into it. And that's one of the big things that this course has taught me about, is just how much life learning you can get out of teaching and how much you can educate students out of life outside of the classroom. I don't want to just teach them English. I don't want to just teach them math. I want to make sure that when they walk out of that classroom, they've learned something that's going to make them a better person moving forwards. So I want to ensure that I'm creating that safe space for them to have these conversations. I want to try as best as possible not to contribute to any form of ableism or systemic racism or LGBTQ kind of issues or isms for them. I want to make sure, or transphobia or anything like that, I want to make sure that as best as possible my classroom is both safe, but it's also a spot that we can talk about these issues and that we can educate students on them as well, because some of the stuff is just students being completely unaware. Like, I know a lot of students, when they're throwing around kind of racist language or inappropriate language, it's just because they don't understand how hurtful or impactful that can be. And that's what this course has taught me, is just how important it is to educate your students on this stuff, so that way they are aware of what they're saying, what they're doing, and the impacts that it can have on other people. And not just so that they can be a better person, but then also giving them the tools to, if this is something you're passionate about, move forwards and start advocating for it yourself. I know, like, I volunteer with a mental health organization at Brock, and we do presentations at high schools, and one of the biggest things we end it with is, hey, if you really liked this presentation, this is your call to action. These are some ways that you can get involved, either with our organization or in your local community, or just being an advocate left, right, and center. And that's one of the best things that I think I would be most proud of if I could instill that in my students, is that passion to continue their learning, continue their advocacy outside of my classroom, and kind of instill that desire, that passion for learning in them. And just to conclude, I want to thank you so much for this entire semester and year. I've learned a ton. You've really opened my eyes to so many things, so many aspects of the educational system. And thank you. I hope you have a fantastic summer, and good luck next year when you try to get a new job and kind of leaving Brock as well with us. See ya. Bye, Kim.